The meeting began on schedule. The top brass filed into the war room, every uniform sharp, every rank in place, except for one seat, the chair at the head of the table empty. Hai Hongjun wasn't there. The man chosen by Xi Jinping himself to be the next leader of the PLA vanished before dawn. No trial, no explanation, only silence. But silence in Beijing always means one thing: fear. Inside Zongnanhai, the whispers moved faster than the news. If Hai could fall, who's next? Which general? Which faction? Which loyalist would be the next to disappear? Because in a leadership ruled by purges, trust dies fast. And when trust dies, power bleeds. The real question now isn't about the Americans. It isn't about trade. It's about who inside the room is already reaching for the knife. Hai Hongjun was not just another general. He was the chosen one. Xi Jinping's personal pick. The man fast-tracked through the ranks. The symbol of absolute control over the People's Liberation Army. His rise wasn't earned on the battlefield. It was written in the script of Beijing's power play, bypassing older commanders, sidestepping the veterans, breaking the chain of respect that once defined the military's inner circle. That's why his fall hit so hard. Hai wasn't purged for corruption. The leadership didn't even bother to invent charges for the public. He simply disappeared, removed without warning, erased from the room before anyone could ask why. But inside the PLA, no one needed the official story, because every officer understood the message. If the hand-picked successor can vanish overnight, no one is safe. And when no one is safe, the system stops working. The cracks were already there. Xi's relationship with the military was always transactional. Loyalty bought with promotions, obedience secured through budget flows, careers managed by fear and favors. But fear has a shelf life, and favors run out when the money dries up. The US tariffs didn't just hit China's factories. They hit the paychecks that fund the military's chain of command. Defense contractors stalled. Procurement budgets slashed. Bonuses delayed. Training scaled back. The cash that once smoothed the edges of military frustration began to thin. Started small. Officers asking quietly if their promotion lists were still moving. Rumors that certain budgets were being held back. But the purge of Hai Hongjun turned rumors into action. Because Hai wasn't just a man. He was a signal. A signal that the leadership had lost confidence. A signal that no position was secure, no matter how close you stood to the top. And the men who had watched Hai leap over them, the commanders who had swallowed their pride for the sake of stability, they understood what came next. The system wasn't built on love. It was built on predictability. If you follow the rules, if you wait your turn, the machine moves. The chain of loyalty holds. But now the chain is broken. In the Southern Theater Command, junior officers began avoiding discretionary meetings. In the Northern Command, brigade-level commanders stopped volunteering for high-profile exercises. In the rocket forces, logistics teams quietly rerouted communications, bypassing traditional reporting lines. Not rebellion, not yet, just silence. And in a military where command relies on speed and obedience, silence is its own kind of revolt. Because power in Beijing doesn't collapse through confrontation. Collapses when everyone stops answering the phone. Hai Hongjun's purge was meant to send a message of strength. Instead, it exposed the weakness that the leadership tried so hard to hide. The weakness wasn't outside the gates. It wasn't the Americans. It wasn't the economy. The weakness was inside the room, inside the ranks, inside the trust that once held the system together. And once that trust breaks, the purge doesn't stop the bleeding. It makes it worse. The People's Liberation Army is not one army. It is a map of competing interests, layers of history, networks of loyalty, old ties that run deeper than any slogan. The illusion of unity was always maintained by one thing: control at the top. And Hai Hongjun was supposed to be the keystone of that control. His rise was designed to bypass the factions. A shortcut straight to loyalty, not through respect, but through appointment. But when Hai fell, the map began to shift. Because beneath the surface, the PLA is carved into zones of power. Each region, each command, each force with its own weight, its own alliances. The Southern Theater Command, overseeing the South China Sea, with decades of senior officers built through naval logistics and maritime defense. Many of these commanders earned their positions long before Xi's military reshuffle. Many watched as Hai Hongjun leapt over their heads. The Northern Command, the missile bases, the border troops, veterans of past skirmishes along the Russian and Korean frontiers. They see themselves as the backbone of national defense, not political puppets. The Western Command, Tibet, Xinjiang, the sensitive borders where military control is tight, but local loyalties are complicated. Political commissars here hold influence equal to the generals. The purge in Beijing only sharpens their instinct for self-preservation. The rocket forces, China's nuclear arm, the ultimate leverage point, a force where chain of command must be absolute, but where doubt has now been planted. When Hai Hongjun was removed, none of these factions moved outward. They moved inward. Closed meetings, private dinners between old allies, generals reaching out to retired mentors, the men pushed out during Xi's first round of purges. Silent conversations in safe circles. Not coup planning. Not yet. Positioning. The older commanders who had been forced to step aside, the veterans who had lost their seats to Xi's promotions, now find their phones ringing again. The doors that were once closed are quietly opening. The calculation is simple. If the successor could be erased overnight, if the chain of command could be rewritten so easily, then no one knows how the game ends. And in that uncertainty, the factions realign. Not to overthrow, but to survive. Some units began slowing down on compliance. Participation in joint exercises quietly dropped. Responses to directives delayed by hours, sometimes days. The language remains formal. The reports remain polished. But the reality beneath is different. In a command system where timing is everything, slow answers are a warning shot. Because when orders don't move smoothly, the leadership loses its grip. Xi's attempt to bind the PLA through purges and promotions has reached its limit. Instead of cementing control, the crackdown has reopened the old fractures. Generals are asking themselves the only question that matters now. If Xi can't protect his own successor, how long before he can't protect anyone? The PLA is not raising banners. They are not marching on Beijing. They don't have to. In a system where power depends on trust, and trust depends on fear, the quiet withdrawal of consent is the first step toward collapse. The lines are being redrawn, and in the PLA, those lines decide who stands and who disappears. Power in Beijing doesn't move on ideology. It moves on money. The soldiers wear the uniforms. The generals sit at the table. But the lifeblood of the system, the fuel that keeps the gears turning, flows through the defense contracts, the military suppliers, the money chains that feed the army from the outside. And when the money stops, so does the loyalty. Hai Hongjun wasn't just a general. He was a gatekeeper. His position secured the flow of funds into key defense contractors. His network funneled contracts to PLA-backed businesses, from arms production to logistics firms, from aerospace suppliers to cyber defense companies. When Hai fell, those contracts froze. The first signs weren't loud. Procurement orders delayed. Payments held up. Bids canceled without explanation. But inside the industry, everyone understood. The purge had landed on the doorstep of the military economy. And when the cash flow slows at the top, the pressure spreads down the line. In Shenzhen, drone manufacturers tied to PLA surveillance units began reporting project suspensions. In Xi'an, a missile component supplier abruptly lost its latest procurement deal. In Shanghai, a shipbuilder with links to the Southern Command was told to await further instructions before completing its next delivery. The message wasn't written on any document. It moved through conversations in offices and quiet phone calls after hours. Wait, see where this goes. The military-industrial complex in China is not just an extension of the army. It is a web of partnerships, family ties, and political patronage, a system where defense contracts are as much about power as they are about hardware. For the business elites who supply the PLA, the calculus is always the same. Stay close to the right faction. Fund the right players. Keep the contracts moving. But with Hai Hongjun gone, the map of the right players was redrawn overnight. The businessmen who once hosted generals at banquets, who funded veterans' foundations and military academies, now found themselves asking, whose side am I on? And is that still the safe side? Some quietly began pulling back. Donations paused. Sponsorships left unsigned. Funding to certain military-linked projects temporarily suspended for review. Not rebellion, not defection, just a soft, deliberate retreat. Because in the military economy, like in the battlefield, you don't charge into a collapsing front. You step back. You wait. You watch. The PLA's procurement network isn't built for sudden shifts. The contracts are long-term, the supply chain's complex. But when fear enters the system, the first thing to collapse is confidence. Confidence in the leadership. Confidence in the payouts. Confidence in who will still be standing to sign the next deal. In Guangdong, a defense electronics supplier told a Reuters contact, the paperwork is still moving, but slower, a lot slower. People are waiting to see whose signature will be valid 6 months from now. In Beijing, logistics firms that once worked exclusively with PLA-affiliated units began reaching out to civilian markets, hedging their bets, building new revenue streams outside the military zone. The quiet shift is everywhere. Less investment into military R&D startups. Lower bidding activity for new equipment tenders. Delayed disbursement of funding for joint ventures between the Army and state-owned enterprises. This isn't a liquidity crisis. It's a confidence crisis, because the defense industry knows one thing better than anyone else. Armies don't lose when they run out of soldiers. They lose when they run out of paychecks. And right now, the people who control the paychecks are hesitating. Not because they oppose Xi, but because they don't trust the ground under his feet. The money moves first. The power follows. The purge that started with Hai Hongjun didn't just shake the PLA's leadership. It cracked the foundation of its funding. And the business elites, the ones who have always known how to survive a leadership change, are already moving their chips off the table. Waiting, watching, choosing their moment. Because in Beijing, the generals hold the guns. But the businessmen hold the cash. And when the cash stops flowing, the real collapse begins. The generals sit at the top. But the machine runs on the men beneath them, the colonels, the captains, the logistics officers, the mid-level commanders who make the orders move. These are the men who keep the PLA functioning. The ones who run the drills, move the fuel, staff the radar stations, keep the missiles on alert. They're not on television. They're not in the headlines. But they are the key. And right now, they're pulling back. The purge of Hai Hongjun sent a signal up the ranks. But it echoed loudest among the mid-level officers, the backbone of China's military machine. Because they're close enough to the power struggle to feel the heat, but far enough down the ladder to know they won't be protected if the fight turns ugly. Inside the mess halls, the questions began immediately. Who ordered the arrest? Who's next? Do we keep following these directives? Or do we wait? No one called it mutiny. No one refused a direct order. But the shift was there. Meeting attendance slipped. Commanders stopped volunteering for non-essential operations. Training exercises scheduled for joint units quietly postponed. In the Southern Theater Command, reports surfaced of routine air patrols being cut short, fuel rationing cited as the excuse. In the Northern Command, field exercises reduced participation by nearly 30% over the past 2 months. But the real sign wasn't in the numbers. It was in the tone. The check-ins that used to happen twice a day slowed to once, then once every other day. The field updates that used to arrive within the hour now took half a shift. Responses came slower. Salutes stayed formal but colder. Because in the PLA, the chain of command only works when the men believe that following the chain keeps them safe. And Hai's arrest shattered that belief. If the chosen successor can be disappeared without warning, then the old rule is broken. Follow orders, stay safe. The officers on the ground began hedging, not speaking out, not standing up, but stepping back. Less engagement, less initiative. a subtle form of non-cooperation that Beijing's top brass felt almost immediately. Because a military machine can survive anger, can even survive doubt, but it cannot survive hesitation. In a command structure where precision is power, where timing is the difference between readiness and failure, delay is the deadliest disease. The leadership tried to close the gap with loyalty checks. Mandatory political education sessions ramped up across bases. Unit leaders ordered to reaffirm commitment to Xi Jinping's authority. But the more they pushed, the quieter the room became. One mid-level officer from the Northern Command, speaking anonymously through a trusted channel, said it clearly. Everyone is waiting, watching. No one wants to be the first to commit if the top is about to fall. Because the men who stand in formation on the parade ground aren't stupid. They know the history. The PLA has seen what happens when politics comes before the chain of command. When loyalty to the leader overtakes loyalty to the system. The Cultural Revolution, the purges of the 1980s. They know how these stories end. And they know the safest move right now isn't to fight back. It's to step sideways, to hold the line but hold it loosely, to follow the orders but slowly, to salute the flag but keep one eye on the door. The leadership still holds the ranks. The structure still stands. But the blood has cooled. The chain of command is intact on paper. But in the real world, the links are rusting. And in a system built on speed, the silent choice to slow down is the first act of defiance. No statements were made. No official policies announced. But behind closed doors, the questions were already moving. Who's left standing after the purge? Who takes the next call from Washington? Because outside the walls of Zongnanhai, the world was already preparing for the next chapter. The arrest of Hai Hongjun was meant to show strength. But what Washington, and every capital from Tokyo to Brussels, saw instead was weakness. They didn't need inside intelligence. The silence from the generals, the slow retreat of the business elite, the hesitation inside the PLA told them everything they needed to know. The system was cracking. And the smartest move for the outside world was simple. Don't intervene. Don't force the outcome. Just be ready to pick up the phone when the next man calls. In New Delhi, trade officials confirmed that American envoys had begun quietly asking questions about regional stability. Not hypotheticals, but post-Xi scenarios. In Seoul, defense analysts close to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs admitted off the record, "We're watching the military chain of command more closely than we watch state television." In Brussels, the term China contingency diplomacy began appearing in internal briefing papers, not as an aggressive move, but as preparation. Because if the chain of command is breaking, the world still needs someone to answer the phone. It wasn't about regime change. It wasn't about backing any one faction. It was about leverage. The US didn't offer open arms, but it quietly left the door unlocked. Back-channel messages flowed through familiar channels. Former trade partners, third-party embassies, industry associations. The message was never written down. It didn't need to be. The door remains closed for Xi, but not necessarily for whoever comes next. And in Beijing, that signal traveled faster than any tweet. Because the leadership might fear rebellion. But what they fear even more is isolation. For China's generals, for its provincial leaders, for its business elites, access to the global system is the oxygen they depend on. Trade, banking, technology, market stability. And now, quietly, the oxygen mask was being offered. But not to Xi. In Tokyo, chipmakers began contingency planning for sourcing deals without direct Beijing oversight. In Australia, mining executives pushed to renegotiate rare earth agreements, hedging against leadership instability. In Brazil, port operators reported a slowdown in talks with Chinese state-owned firms, waiting, as one insider put it, to see who's still standing by year's end. No sanctions were necessary, no blockades, just patience. And the cracks continued to spread. Even in Moscow, the so-called ally of Beijing, Russian trade officials began quietly shifting focus away from joint infrastructure projects. Not pulling out, but pausing, because the Kremlin understands the game. And they know how to read the air. For now, she still holds the title. The photographs still show him at the center of the table. The state media still repeats his words. But behind the scenes, the world is already preparing for the moment when that chair is empty. Because the question is no longer if. The question is when. And when that call finally comes, the world will be ready to answer. The factories are fading. The business elites are pulling back. The generals are hedging their bets. And outside the walls, the world is waiting, ready to answer the next call. But inside Zongnanhai, the true battlefield isn't the economy. It isn't foreign pressure. It's the men sitting across from Xi Jinping, the ones who once stood in formation behind him, now quietly weighing their options. The purge was meant to tighten control. Instead, it exposed the weakness beneath the surface. No coup, no uprising, no loud defiance, just hesitation, just silence. And in Beijing, silence is the first shot. The only question now is, who will make the next move? And how much time does she really have left? Tell us what you think. This story is just getting started.